First of all, I want to thank General Yellen and Quad A for giving Mike and I the opportunity to talk to you for a little bit this afternoon. My name is Dean Heitkamp. I'm the Deputy Commander of the Army Special Operations Aviation Command. And with me on stage here is my good friend, Mike Hertzendorf. We're joined by a few folks out in the audience as well. Command Sergeant Major Greg Chambers, who's the Command Sergeant Major of the SOAC. And Mike, you want to introduce anybody?
Oh, there we go. All right, I've got my Sergeant Major, so any real hard questions go to him. And my wife is here, so what's sort of unusual is she doesn't listen to me at home. I'm not sure why she had to come here to listen to me, so no hard questions where I'm going to get embarrassed. We do have a Sergeant Major, and we also have Jesse Crispino, the SIMO Director. Raise your hand, Jesse. There you go. So also the hard acquisition questions go to him.
And then somewhere in the audience is CW5 Doug Englund. And then we also have Lieutenant Colonel Daryl Giroux, who's our G8.
Oh, and there he is. And then CW5 Ben Savage, Command Chief Warrant Officer of the 160th. Come on up here, Ben. You can't hide back there. Get with Sergeant Major. All right.
Well, on behalf of Brigadier General Eric Peterson, who's the Commanding General of the Army Special Operations Aviation Command, what Mike and I wanted to do today, just for a few minutes, is talk to you briefly about how Special Ops Aviation is going to approach the future while still trying to meet all the persistent engagements that we have currently. So with that, next slide, please. So when you look at the future, and if you read different documents out there, like Global Trends 2030 and some of the other documents, you see a future that continues to look increasingly complex, still as uncertain, volatile as what we've had over the past decade. In fact, it may be a little bit more. You look at the threats that are out there, again, hybrid threats that are going to use every asymmetric advantage they've got against us. They're going to take advantage of the proliferation of technology, proliferation of weapon systems, make use of cyber capabilities. And if you look at the last bullet, something that Ms. Hughes said this morning, we know we're still going to continue to face fiscal uncertainty and fiscal austerity, which, as she said, was the biggest obstacle we face. So when you look at all those things within Special Ops Aviation, we have to ask ourselves, how do we prepare for that future? And so we have four primary priorities that we've got listed there. The first one is sustain our core competencies beyond the current fight. And Mike's going to talk to you a little bit about that. We also need to posture ourselves to support Special Ops, or provide Special Ops Aviation support forward. Third, we've got to maintain the comparative advantage over our adversaries. And then lastly, we have to improve our affordability without sacrificing effectiveness. And that's the big caveat, is without sacrificing effectiveness. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike.
Okay, thanks, Dean. All right, next slide. Okay, so sustaining our core competencies beyond the current fight. When you think of a core competency, it's that thing that an organization or business does that provides its value to its stakeholders, it's hard to replicate, and it provides it uniqueness. When you think of the 160th, a lot of times that first thing that's going to pop into your mind is some platform, some aircraft, some capability. The 160th is a people-driven organization. Our core competency comes from the dedicated Night Stalkers and the culture within the organization. It's what I think of as the brand name. When I mention FedEx, a picture pops into your mind. When I say UPS, you're going to have a picture to pop in your mind. When I say Night Stalker, the picture that I want you to pop into your mind is of the most professional soldier who will accomplish the mission and is always focused on the ground force. So we'll sort of talk through about what each of those main bullets are. Culture. General Allen talked about it this morning. General Lundy talked about it. Professionalism of the force. 3 C's. Commitment, competency, and character. Competency, I think everybody understands, that is that base of training always for that mission execution in support of the ground force. Character, living the Army values and commitment to each other, to the nation, to the Army, to your buddy, to your families. And that professional soldier exhibits those cultures at all times. Postured and ready. If you think about the current operating environment, and we could talk about, right now where Night Stalkers are deployed, Afghanistan, been there the last 14 years. I'll tell you though, it's different now. It's almost like we're reliving the past, or that back to the future kind of thing. It is austere. There's not a lot of fobs. There's not a lot of gas. There's not a lot of weather reporting. It is expeditionary, hubbed in Bagram, pushing out to all parts of the country. Partnered, conventional aviation, partner nation, Afghan aviation, big packages going out throughout the country, still a very dangerous enemy, very dangerous terrain. Iraq, small footprint, operating hand in hand with joint interagency partners, building partner capacity, and once again, a very austere yet dynamic environment. Overwater operations, mountain operations, jungle operations. Last week, there were Night Stalkers in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Korea, doing training missions, in South America, doing aviation FID, and about 5 other locations in the United States. So globally engaged, and with that diversity in the environment, there's also the diversity in our mission sets. Obviously, the high-end traditional rotary wing, assault, attack, precision operations. We also now have a company of MQ-1 Charlie Gray Eagles, armed ISR, sort of manning the difference between ISR and also getting into manned-unmanned teaming. And then finally, branching out into aviation FID, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. So that current operating environment, very diverse, transitions very quickly from combat operations to other full-spectrum SOF operations, and many different mission sets. So the key to that, one is training, but two, it really gets into the development of leaders, which I'll talk about, adaptive and innovative. A lot of leaders will talk about, hey, we need soldiers to be adaptive, innovative, win in that complex environment. Well, how do you do it? One of the components, obviously, is training. You need to be well-resourced, repetitive actions. You need to be able to operate modern, reliable equipment with technologies that give us that comparative advantage. But really the most important, and we spend a lot of time throughout the ranks, is leader development. And not just on their professional skills, growing as a person, and personally growing as a leader. I think a lot of times people will get leader development and leadership development confused. We spend a lot of time on both, but all ranks teaching people to be good Night Stalkers, good soldiers, good people, and that is truly that characteristic that embodies the culture of the most professional soldier, focused on the ground force, will always accomplish the mission. That is our culture. Back to Dean.
All right, next slide, please. So as we continue to look at the future, one of the things we have to do is figure out is how do we continue to provide our national leaders with the capabilities to meet the global objectives. And so the first thing that we've got to do, and we've already started on this, is regionally align our SOA battalions. There's 3 theater SOA battalions. Regionally align them with the TSOCs. Again, it breeds the familiarity within the region. It builds the relationships with those partner nations. It gets the crews to be accustomed to operating in those environments. And so we'll align each one of the battalions to 2 of the theater SOCs. Now that regional alignment won't be hard and fast. There'll be times when 3rd Battalion is going to be supporting a different TSOC just because of the demand. But we want to build up that relationship that 3rd of the 160th has had in South America, for example, for the last 20, 25 years. And we want each of the battalions to have that relationship around the world. The next aspect of this is providing a unit of employment and tailoring our organization so that we can provide the capabilities and the capacity throughout the globe. We partnered with RAND about a year and a half ago to look at how do we provide the capacity out to all the TSOCs. And we looked at a measure of employment, or a unit of employment, that consists of the C2, the maintenance, and the platforms and crews necessary to provide the capacity and capability out there where we need it. And then the third piece, of course, is a sort of a rotational presence for purpose model. We could take the 160th, divide it up, forward base it all over the place, and we would dilute our capabilities. And by satisfying one solution, we would create a whole bunch of other problems. So for example, how do you keep crews trained in overwater flight when now they're in an environment that they don't have access, or they can't do the aerial refueling that they need to do, or they can't do the desert training, or those sorts of things. So we did some calculations, and it's actually cheaper to do a rotational force from the States than to forward base the forces with all the other training implications that needs to happen. The third aspect is the culture, the adaptability, the innovation that Mike just talked about of having a soft aviator out forward is welcomed and requested by every one of the TSOCs. What is not necessarily welcome is the overt military, large black or green helicopter that has U.S. Army stenciled on the side of it. And so we know we've got to look at some other solutions to provide a lower signature capability out around the world. Now there's multiple ways of doing that. That doesn't mean that we're going to go out and buy a whole bunch of commercial helicopters and put those in the 160th. It could be a COCO solution, it could be a GOCO solution. There are multiple opportunities and multiple ways of doing this. But again, to provide the TSOCs and the GCCs the capabilities they need means we've got to change the way we provide that capability. And then the fourth dimension there is building partner nation aviation capacity. But in our case, more specifically, it's the partner nation aviation soft capacity. And this requires a holistic approach. So it combines what's going on with FMS, it combines what the state guard partnership programs do, it combines what the regional aviation forces are doing along with us. And it's looking at that in a holistic manner to figure out what is the capability that partner nation wants to reach, how best to do that, which forces are the best to do that, and when do we each engage within that engagement plan. And key to that, and something that General Lundy just said, was the CAB-SOF partnership has got to remain strong in order to do that. Because we may come up with a 5-year engagement plan for a partner nation that requires all of those folks, each coming in at a certain period of time to build the force to the next level to continue to progress. Next slide, please.
All right, back to me. All right, so if you've taken, the first priority of that quality individual, as Colonel Heitkamp talked about, all those capabilities, this slide really, in the comparative advantage, speaks to the future technologies. We can talk about the slide for a second and all the things going on, sort of the contemporary operating environment. Could start off with a denied access, air denial kind of mission from ship to shore. So obviously overwater environment, very demanding, partnered up with the Navy. There's operational concerns, there's sustainment concerns, there's logistics concerns when you're operating off ships and you don't have that immediate reach back. Obviously can cover great distances into the littoral regions, aerial refuel, terrain following kinds of capabilities. Onto shore, all of a sudden a different environment through that degraded visual environment. Obviously, for many years, Army Aviation has owned the night. We now have to own all environments. That environment not only enables us to fight at the place and time of our choosing, but it also offers that level of survivability where the enemy doesn't want to be out or his threat weapon systems aren't as advantageous. Threat weapon systems, I think most people in here probably understand that the weapons technology is quickly outpacing our availability and our ability to field weapon systems onto our aircraft. So I'll probably now just talk through some of each of those areas. And once again, this is not just rotary wing centric. This is also coupled up with Gray Eagles and our ISR. So platform improvements, range, speed, payload, and I think most importantly, vertical maneuverability. Colonel Heitkamp's got a great saying here, I will steal it from him. A 747, and I'm not picking on Boeing, we'll use an Airbus, has great range, speed, and payload, but nobody's taken it to the X lately. Good comment by Colonel Heitkamp. So vertical maneuverability. Into the urban areas, very important to be able to land in that corner or maneuver that AH-6 to put that rocket in the second window to the right on the third floor. That directly translates down to the bottom bullet that I have there under maneuver and fires, weight. Increasing technologies have meant increasing weight on our platforms, and this is platform agnostic. We are looking to reduce weight. Operating weight, base weight of aircraft, machine frames are great. They're heavier, and there's some complexities with sustaining them. So any current technology that we look to put on the aircraft, we're going to make some hard choices between that capability and the weight. And then there's also cost. So as we look at all of these requirements, the easiest thing to say is, hey, that thing weighs too much. So I want to take weight right off the table, as we can then talk about the true capabilities that is a requirement and whatever that cost is to put that capability on there. I briefly spoke on operations in the degraded visual environment. Very important, once again, for two reasons: survivability, but also so we can dictate and take the fight to the enemy at the time and place of our choosing. I think there's some good advances coming in there. Wire obstacle avoidance is still a challenge, but I think, current solutions we have, silent night radar with some other technologies, look to be very promising. Lightweight munitions. This is definitely important for all platforms, very much so for our Gray Eagle. Right now we're carrying Hellfires. The difference in weight from a Hellfire to some other weapons like a Griffin, 20 pounds, that equates to an hour's worth of gas on an MQ-1 Charlie. That could be very critical, especially when you're talking over longer distances that we are still currently tied to runways. Finally, I think weight reduction. I'll talk it again because it's that important. Weight. Come to the bottom half here. So I work the entire survivability. I mentioned before threat systems quickly outpacing our technology. Probably the most important one there to mention is airborne mission networking. So in the age of passing data, what we have not mastered yet is how we efficiently move data through all of our aircraft. We need a good backbone for that aircraft to have, and then some of the questions before, General Lundy talking about Link 16, SALT capable, so we can move data within the flight, between flights, to our manned, our unmanned platforms, to the customer on the ground, and also to supporting enabling fixed-wing assets. That airborne mission networking backbone of the aircraft will also then be for integration into technology for threat weapon systems, degraded visual environment. So very important. I think I've covered my points. Dean, back to you.
All right, next slide, please. And it brings us to our final priority. And, if our only task was just to build the most ready, rapidly deployable, lethal aviation force on the globe, that'd be a pretty easy task. But we've also got to be affordable to the nation. And so one of the things that we all recognize is, again, in this period of fiscal uncertainty and fiscal austerity, is how do we become more affordable? The first thing that you look at is, again, do we understand the total cost of ownership? And if we do understand it, can we influence it? I think we've done a lot better over the past 10 years of trying to wrap our arms around what all goes into the total cost. It used to be we tracked it by the cost of a flying hour. So if a Black Hawk cost $5,000, okay, that was $5,000 a flying hour, okay, that was it. But we have come to realize that there's direct and indirect costs, and there's both fixed and variable cost. We have to understand all of those. We also have to understand cost avoidance. So, for example, if you pay $400,000 for an FSR, but he or she saves you $1 million, did that get wrapped back up into the total cost of ownership as a savings? And does the budget person care? Along with the total cost of ownership is, understanding what are those elements. Corrosion control is one element where the regiment has done some pretty significant things over the past 3 to 4 years. At one point in time, I think they were tracking close to $10 million in losses could be attributed to corrosion. So we've been studying the aspects of corrosion on flight operations. One of the mitigating strategies was to use a bird bath or a bird wash, aircraft wash. The impact of corrosion on parts. And so we've gone to dehumidified part storage, as well as enforcing and documenting the corrosion control or the corrosion standards. So ensuring that we package parts correctly, we store them correctly, we handle them correctly, and we install them correctly. The next piece up there is, the interoperability and commonality of parts. The first thing is, again, interoperability in terms of Army common solutions, joint common solutions. But when I think about the other interoperability or commonality is, can we get to the point where instead of always adding another black box in the helicopter, can we figure out how to swap out the circuit cards or the circuit boards in the black box? Can we make use of the antennas and the sensors on the aircraft so that multiple systems can access the inputs coming off the sensors and the antennas? And can we make use of the multiple use of the jammers? Again, it does a couple things for us. It lowers procurement costs, it lowers sustainment costs, it lowers weight, and all of that equates to a more affordable force. The third piece is we know we've got to get better at integrating the health monitoring systems that are on the aircraft. It's not enough just to find out that the aircraft is picking up vibrations. We need to integrate that data with all the other streams of data that we've got. How was the aircraft used? What was the gross weight? What was the environments? How long did it spend a certain amount of time at a certain torque level or at a certain operating temperature? And use all of that to try to extend out the TBO on our components, with the ultimate goal of extending out the time on wing of our components. There's an estimate, and I can't remember who the source was, I think it was AED, said that the majority of the parts removed off of an aircraft have greater than 50% of its TBO life remaining. And they were removed for something, whether it was a failure, corrosion, or no fault at all. And the last piece is reducing fuel consumption. And again, this is more than just lowering the cost of fuel. Everybody knows that fuel makes up, in the Army, one of the 3 parts of the flying hour model. For SOF, it's one of the 5 parts. But reducing the fuel cost is more than just saving that money. It's also, if you can reduce the fuel consumption, you get extended range, or perhaps you can take on less fuel, which equates to greater flexibility for the operator. Maybe they carry more ammo. Maybe you can put an additional operator on board. Maybe it's more loiter time at the objective. There's a whole bunch of benefits that come with reducing the fuel consumption that all, again, will contribute to the affordability of the fleet. And with that, next slide, please. So we're at the end of our short talk. That's right. So Mike and I have a couple ground rules, and that is the easy yes/no questions I'll take. All the tough, difficult questions Mike's got. So any questions?
Operational costs with acquisition costs in order to look at the total cost picture when those budgets are normally separated?
That's definitely a great question for Dean.
So instead of throwing the softball, his question was, how do you integrate the acquisition costs with the life cycle costs so that you've got a complete picture? So in SOF, one of the ways we do that is, of course, we have TAPO, which is our life cycle manager. Again, we run a 5-part model, and we break it up into 2 pieces of the budget. So we have a flying hour program budget, and we have a FOS, or a flight hour operation sustainment budget. The hard part about that is when I was talking about the fixed and flexible costs, so the variable costs are directly attributed to the flying hour. The fixed cost is things like, you pay $10 million for a CFT contract, combining those two and trying to get the answer. And so we combine them, but again, this is where I said we still need to make some progress on our total cost of ownership. We know what all the costs are, and I will tell you that the budgeteers still want it separated out. They don't want, one budget. They want a FOS budget and a flying hour budget, and they want to tax you at different rates based on that. The acquisition piece, I'm afraid I don't have a good answer. Hey, Jess, any thoughts on how you combine the acquisition costs and the sustainment costs into one holistic budget? Jess Crispino's the director of our SIMO, so he does all of our requirements, development testing.
So when we write the requirements documents now, we're required to actually account for all that, RDT&E, that proc, and then what the O&M bill is going to be. So when we take that down to SOCOM to get that requirement validated, they're looking at that whole picture. And so we'll do that for a CDD and then again for a CPD as we get closer to production of a system we desire.
You don't have any Link 16 plans?
Link 16.
Link 16 plans.
Jess, you might as well just stay at the microphone.
Airborne mission networking, right there.
So our airborne mission network is a series of different networks at different levels, little bubbles, if you will. Then it gets to a bigger bubble. And then we have a plan to incorporate a Link 16 radio in there to give us the largest bubble, if you will. And then the 231 will roll in with MEOs for that over the horizon. So we have a valid requirement, and we actually have put our own money against that right now as well.
Yes, sir.
Gentlemen, good afternoon. My name's Lieutenant Colonel Charlie Barton. I'm the Australian Army Aviation Liaison Officer at Rucker. I've got two questions for you, so I'm hoping you'll be able to hit both. The first one is, what are your expectations of foreign Army aviation SO elements from your perspective? And the second question is that given your requirements to remain so expeditionary and that you're trying to reduce the lifecycle costs of your systems, are your current systems now becoming the limitation?
Okay, let me at least talk to the first part here. Expectations of our partners' special operations capabilities. One of the overarching areas within that aviation FID that we need to do a better job of, and we're just really starting to understand the scope of the problem, is partnering up with all of our, and I'll say Five Eyes partners. So right now, our habitually aligned 4th Battalion on the West Coast goes to Australia at least once, if not twice a year. I want to build a partner relationship. I want to have a permanent exchange. Right now, we have an exchange with a Marine. I know the 101st has an Australian officer. I want to get that Australian officer over to the 160th, and I want to start having a habitual exchange. So I've got an Australian officer in our ranks. I want to do that with Australia. I want to do it with Canada. I want to do it with Great Britain. Probably the three easiest. That would probably be at the highest level. At the next level, other nations that have great capabilities, France, Israel. I want to continue with subject matter exchanges to develop those working relationships. And then probably at the lower level of FID is where we're going out to nations that do not have that higher end capability, such as Australia, Canada, but we're helping them to develop a capability towards special operations. Maybe it's somewhat platform-centric, but it's habitually aligned with the ground force, air-ground integration, mission planning, to develop those skills. And then I think where we go is we look at a global approach, sort of the whole of government for the globe. I know that Australia is very well tied into certain parts of the Pacific conducting aviation FID. So as we look at PACOM as a whole, maybe, the northern part with Korea, the 160th says, or our SOAC says, hey, we're going to do some of our aviation FID up here. Australia, you have, the Indonesia, Malaysia kind of area. So I think it is a very broad strategy, starting with habitual relationships that we want to explore in exchanges, all the way down to that more traditional aviation FID, and then tying that strategy together so we are being the most efficient between those nations, and we're not all going after the same place. I sort of use, Iraq as an example. The coalition is in there. We're all sorts of doing the same things, advise and assist, but I'm not sure we're doing it in the most efficient manner because we're all sort of double tapping it. So I think as we get into aviation FID, we have to be very efficient in that strategy. So I think that answers question number one. Part two was about capabilities. Help me out here. I forgot after I was so long-winded on part one there.
So thank you for answering the first bit. Given your requirement to be so expeditionary, and your limitations that you've articulated, is the current suite of systems that you have acceptable in the future?
I think right now they are. So when you think of expeditionary operations, small. By design, we do pretty well at smaller tailored packages. Right now in one of the locations, we have about 100 soldiers deployed with upwards of 10 different aircraft, both fixed wing or ISR, Gray Eagle, and rotor wing. That's a pretty small tooth-to-tail ratio, one platform for every 10 soldiers. I think the real challenge becomes logistics and sustainment, because those smaller packages, if we have them all over the globe, we are somewhat limited in the numbers of maintenance, command and control nodes we could put out. And part of it also becomes the expectation. Over the last 14 years, primarily Iraq and Afghanistan, very, very high OR rates, very, very quickly executed missions because there was that infrastructure there. Crews had been operating there habitually, and they knew it. As we get into that expeditionary, more austere, I think you have to manage the expectations of how many nights you're going to be executing, the time to plan a mission, all of those other constraints. And so I don't think our technologies are a limiting factor. I think, if anything, it'll be sustainment and logistics, and there just has to be an expectation of how you operate expeditionary. It is not get there, roll off the C-17, crank it up and go. Everything just takes a little bit longer. I hope that answers the question. All right. I'm not getting paid by the question, so.
Okay, well, on behalf of the SOAC, I'd like to thank everybody for attending this afternoon's Q&A session, and we hope this was valuable for you. Thank you.
Thank you.